everyone, it's Lisa from My Dream in Soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. Today is another soap that I made for the Soap Challenge Club. And this month, for April, we were doing polka dot designs. Now we had a guest teacher, Tatiana Serko, who did her polka dots. And as normal, my soap isn't actually an entry for the club. It's just an example of the technique that was done to help members of the Soap Challenge Club and to come up with maybe different ways that we could actually do this technique. So come on, let's go and see how I made my polka dot soap. I made a template for my soap, but I didn't have any polymer clay or anything like that around, so I just wanted to use what I had available, so I decided to give it a go using some melt and pour. So I drew up my template to fit my mould, and I just printed it out on some normal A4 paper. And then I just melted my melt and pour in the microwave like you normally would. This is just some old melt and pour that I use time and time again for all sorts of jobs like this, sealing the ends of moulds, that sort of stuff. I never actually use it to make soap. I didn't particularly measure out how much melt and pour I wanted. I just took the view I was going to melt it down and pour a sort of thickness that I wanted. I used clear melt and pour, and I've actually poured it on top of my template because that way I can then use my template and see through the melt and pour, so I can punch the little holes out that I need to make my template. So when that was all set up, I then just went gently round the edge with a blade just to release it from the tray, and then took it off the tray. And then with the paper still attached to it, I just took a tube from an old pen. So I took the various bits and pieces out of the pen, so I had the hollow tube left. And that was pretty well the spot on same size as I wanted for my holes to punch. So I just used that and punched the holes in the melt and pour to make my grid. I did find pushing down on the top of that pen actually started to hurt my hand. That's why I've got that little blue cloth there, just to protect my hand. And then also every now and again I needed to push out all the little holes that I'd made. So I just got a little metal stick that I've got and used that to just push out those little extras. Once I'd punched out all the holes in my template, you can see from all the carnage around that I've just peeled off that backing paper from my melt and pour. Also, I've made sure that I've made some extra holes in the template that aren't going to be filled with polka dots, and that's for me to be able to get the soap into the soap mould. If you are going to make a template, do make sure that you make one bit of the template that will fit inside your soap mould, and then the other bit of the template needs to be wider to go on the top and not fall in. The holes still need to line up though, it's just the outside of that template that needs to be wider. Now you will see quite a few videos on YouTube where they're making polka dot soaps and using straws to make holes in their soap and then filling them in with fluid soap batter. I'm not a fan of single-use plastics, so to me the idea of using straws just to make a soap and having to use quite a lot of them, I mean I had 89 polka dots in my soap, just didn't sit well with me. So I tried a different technique and it actually worked really well. So as you can see by what's going on the screen, I've just used extruded soap dough for my dots. Now in this case I am just doing a round dot, so I just took a basic simple round shape from my normal extruder and I've just extruded a load of white soap dough. I have done some other soaps where I've done little flowers and little hearts using exactly the same technique, and they all work really well with the soap dough. After I'd extruded my soap dough, I then cut it into pieces so that the polka dots are going to be long enough to go all the way through the soap and stick out of the top of the template, because the template is what needs to hold them nice and steady so we get nice evenly spaced polka dots. Now they don't have to be exactly even or anything, let's not get too fussy here. As long as they're sticking out of your template, that's fine. And then because the soap dough is likely to be a little bit wibbly wobbly, we want these nice and straight. I then just took this is just like a sugar paste smoother or something. You can get them very cheaply with icing kits, and just took each one of my sticks and just gently rolled it. It's always good to roll it with something like this that's flat, because then that gives you nice straight sticks. You can do this, as I've already said, with other shapes. It works just as well. You just need to be very careful that as you're rolling anything that's not just a round dot, that you're very gentle and you're just straightening these out to get rid of any bends. You're not actually trying to squash the soap dough. Okay, so 89 dots later and a few extra just in case, all rolled and straightened nicely. I'm now just going to put these onto a stainless steel sheet and leave them to sit just for an hour or so, just so they stiffen up a little bit. And then it's time for the great polka dot fill. So it's just literally a case of grabbing our little sticks and just popping them in the mould and just making sure that you're lining up the correct top and bottom holes. Mine was great here. I've got one of those moulds that I can actually see through, which is quite helpful, but otherwise you're going to have to wiggle around a little bit and maybe lift up that top template a bit and have a look to see what's going on. Okay, so let's get our soap batter made up then. So the colours I'm going to be using are Purple Passion and Turquoise Delight. Both of these are from You Make It Up. Now You Make It Up isn't supplying to the UK, and they're not taking any new customers at all, but you can get You Make It Up stuff from the Soapery and Soap Kitchen. I'm sure there's some other places, or direct from Pure Rock Minerals, and they are the people who actually supply You Make It Up in the first place. And then the fragrance oil I'm using is Bermuda Triangle from Sentimental. Again, Sentimental is somewhere I'm not even really sure if they're still trading anymore. I've tried to contact them and can't get any contact at all. I think it may be the same fragrance as the Bermuda Triangle from Nature's Garden. Certainly looking at the documentation, all the content and ingredients seem to be at exactly the same percentages, so it might be the same one. So I've calculated the amount of soap batter that I'm going to need. Now how I've done that is I've worked out the normal amount of soap batter that I need to fill my mould, and then I've weighed all my little polka dot sticks. Now those polka dot sticks we know are going to stick out further than the top of my soap. So therefore I've then just said this is the weight of my total polka dot sticks. I actually only want 8 centimetres out of the 10 centimetres long that they are, and used that proportion of the polka dot weight. Don't forget, if you are adjusting for an embed, make sure you adjust for the oil in the embed. So don't just take the whole weight of the embed, work out your oil amount in it by knowing your oil percentage, and that is the amount you need to take from the oils that you want to make up. If you can't be dealing with all of that maths, then just make up some soap, err on the side of being a little bit generous, and then just pour the extra into some spare moulds. Now this is going to be another one of those soaps where it's really important to have a very fluid batter. Because remember, as soon as you get your batter that's a bit thick, it's not going to flow all in between all those lots of little poles that we've put in our soap. So in this situation, make sure you're using a fragrance oil that you can trust, not to speed up your trace. Also make sure you soap relatively cool. I still always soap between 80 and 90 degrees F, just because that stops me getting a false trace or any steric spots. And then the most important thing is to make sure you're just taking your batter just to an emulsion. Don't be getting it to trace at this point, because it will thicken up too much by the time you get everything in the mould. I'm going to be using those two colours for the pour around my polka dots, and I just want them split evenly, so I'm just dividing that batter out. And as normal, I've pre-mixed my micas in some oil taken from my batch of soap. And remember, when you're trying to keep a very light trace, do pre-mix your micas up. You don't want to be stick blending at this point. And then I'm just going to divide out my fragrance oil evenly between the two bits of soap. And then just check that I have got the lightest amount of trace before I go and pour them into my squeeze bottles. So I'm just going to pour in approximately even amounts into a squeeze bottle, so that I end up with an in the pot swirl type effect. You could use a big squeeze bottle and get it all in to one squeeze bottle, but I always like these slightly smaller squeeze bottles. I just find them easier to use. I'm going to fill 2 of them up at a time, because it's going to be fairly quick to get this in the mould. The reason I'm not putting it all into squeeze bottles just yet is because if I leave some in the jugs, then that does mean that if it does start to thicken up a tiny weeny bit, I can give it a good stir before I put it in the bottle. If you've loaded it all into the bottle, that's fine if you've got a single colour, because you can then shake the bottle. But if you've got what I'm doing here, trying to get sort of like an in the pot swirl, you don't want to be shaking your bottles up and mixing everything around. So all I've got to do now is literally squeeze the soap through those, remember those extra holes I made in my template? Squeezing it through those to fill up my soap mould. And as you can see now, a squeeze bottle is so much easier to do this than trying to do it with a jug and a funnel and all that sort of palaver. So just filling it in with your squeeze bottle works really well. Make sure you do have a number of extra holes all the way round your template, because it's much easier to squirt your soap in at various locations rather than try and squeeze it all in at one end and then try and get it to flow between all of those little poles to spread out through your mould. And I'll just carry on refilling my squeeze bottles and squeezing it into the mould until I've used up all my soap batter. I did still C-pop this soap. Now, if you are going to C-pop and you've done your moulds out of melt and pour, do a little test first. I did a tester with just a piece of melt and pour that I made a little trial template from, popped it in the oven at my normal C-pop temperatures and left it in there to see if it would be okay, and it was. So therefore I then went and C-popped my whole soap. That little individual soap there in front of the mould is just where I've scraped out my squeeze bottles, and that will be one of my little cloud samples that I do. So the next day I unmoulded my rather spiky hedgehog-esque soap and just sort of roughly trimmed off all those little extra knobbly bits. So the polka dot soap is another one of those designs where you want to cut your bars horizontally. So the easiest way to do that is to divide your loaf up first into chunks, and then you can just use a normal soap cutter to slice the soap. Don't try and slice long bits off it unless you've got, a long log cutter or something. That would possibly work. Now, because I'm doing this as an example soap for technique for the Challenge Club, I am actually going to cut this soap so that my cuts go through some of the polka dots, which then gives a great effect around the edge of the soap. You'll see later on when you see some of the other soaps that I've made that aren't examples for the Challenge Club as such. I've just made them because I quite enjoy making them, that I haven't trimmed off that extra bit of soap. I've left it there because obviously it's a bit wasteful if you're trimming off all of this excess. And then you will also need to trim off your template. And typically, no matter what your template's made of, it's going to stick to your soap. Remember, I made that melt and pour template, so that's what that bottom little layer is on mine. So clearly I want to get rid of that, and that's going to have to go. And once I've trimmed that off, all of them, I'm then just going to split these bars in half. I just want them in half because I want some nice chunky bars for these soaps. Obviously you can make them as thin or as thick as you fancied. And there we can see our polka dot designs coming through. I do think the soap dough embed technique does work really well for this technique. I know a lot of people who use the straws had an awful lot of problem actually trying to reliably fill the polka dots with fluid batter after they'd removed the straws. I think it's okay if you have just do 1 or 2 bars thick, but if you're doing a deeper soap or if your batter thickens up at all, then you can get into trouble. You just need to drop your soap in very carefully and bang the mould down a lot. But as I say, the soap dough method, extruding soap dough and just letting that stiffen up a little bit, does seem to work really well. And then I'll just leave you with some final pictures of the soaps and also some other soaps that I've made using exactly the same technique. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you like all the soaps. If you have, it'll be great if you gave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, then why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!